Welcome back to another True Crime Saturday. Tonight, we are looking at the Keddie murders. Now, this is a case that it's going to be very, very unsettling for quite a few people. Why? Is mostly because this actually inspired a later horror movie, or rather series, titled The Strangers. Now, it was loosely inspired, and has inspired other horror stories and all sorts of other tales and media to be released. Now, this case, it's unsettling for quite a few reasons, besides the fact that it also inspired Hollywood to make a horror movie loosely based on it. But it's the fact that this family was killed in the middle of the night in their home. Now, the details surrounding the case we're going to be exploring. This is another case we will explore later on. Obviously, we have time to explore these things. This is very, very much like the Crowley case. It's unsolved, and there's lots and lots of speculation here, right? But that being said, this is also another exercise for us to actually start delving into really the crime scene itself, why certain details are very, very crucial to gather, and when investigators don't gather these things, it does raise suspicion a little bit, and it should, because this is basic stuff that law enforcement isn't grabbing. It's a little unsettling because that means they're not doing their job the way they're supposed to. And I get it. There's law enforcement out there that they just, hey, how's it going, Deb? There's law enforcement out there that they're just trying to get in, do their job, and get out. I get it, but when it comes to this type of stuff, not ever is this going to be acceptable. So they need to start paying closer attention, as you guys are going to start seeing as we start looking at the actual investigative board, what we've got. Like I said, there's going to be a lot we are going to be exploring in the future. I have a list of cases we're going to be looking at in the meantime, and then once we hit those, then I'm going to go back over them. So bear with me. We'll probably end up investigating these cases further down the line, roughly probably around, if I had to guess, anywhere between August and September. All right, but let's just start getting right into it. So what exactly occurred? Well, what we've got on the timeline here, minimal details, right? So Sheila Sharp, at around 8 o'clock or so, left her home and then traveled roughly about 15 feet or so to the Seabolt's family residence for a sleepover, which, keep in mind, this was the first time this has ever occurred. Not sure why this was a crucial detail here. We don't know really the relationship with the Seabolts and the Sharp family, but this is the first time she'd ever stayed over, so I'm assuming she'd recently made friends with one of the two daughters, if I had to guess. But once again, that's mere speculation. Then when she arrived at the Seabolt residence, her sister, Tina Sharp, was there, and she was informed by her mother before she left for the Seabolt residence to let her sister know that her mother wanted Tina to return to the residence at no later than 10 o'clock at night. Well, Tina left the residence at 9:55 and then returned home. Keep in mind, it's only 15 feet away. So this wouldn't have taken long. 5 minutes, that's pretty unacceptable amount of time for 15 feet, I would say. But I digress. So at around 7 o'clock in the morning, though, Sheila returns home to find her mother, her brother, John Sharp, and who is her eldest brother, and then their friend, Dana Wingate. I think that's how you pronounce it. They were all bound by medical tape and electrical cords around their wrists and... No, well, I take that back. John and his mother were. Dana was not. Dana was not bound. And I think he was the first to be killed, but I think he was the one who also probably put up a bit of a fight, because it's a little bizarre. Very well could have just maybe... I didn't see any any bindings around his legs either. I very well could have missed it. I doubt it, but I very well could have missed it. But it did look like John and his mother were bound. His mother was gagged by her undergarments, and I believe it was medical tape over her mouth as well. So, a little bizarre. That's actually very, very bizarre why they did that. But I'm not sure if she was in like a nightgown or if she was just in like a dress or whatever. But she was in some sort of outfit like that. Like I said, her undergarments were removed and then gagged in her mouth with medical tape covering her mouth. But Sheila is the one to discover this. Now, what she had seen was not only were they bound with electrical cord and medical tape, but they were all brutally beaten. And now there's a few key details we'll get into in here in just a moment, but they were brutally beaten, and it wasn't necessarily just with hands. It's more or less with an object, which we'll get into. And then, of course, they were all dead. So Sheila, of course, ran screaming back to the Seabolts and returned to the residence to recover the known surviving children, which were Rick and Greg Sharp, which were just young little boys. I believe it was a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, and then Justin Smart, who was a 12-year-old. And she had found out that they were still alive. The details are a little unclear as to how she found out how they were alive, but she had discovered they were alive, and so they recovered the boys via the window in the room they were in, adjacent from the crime scene, of course. And they'd gotten them out of the window, and then, of course, the Seabolt male who had come with Sheila had actually decided, oh, well, I'm going to go in through the back door. After helping the boys out, goes in through the back door looking for any other surviving members. However, there was nobody else surviving, but he did contaminate the rest of the crime scene, or at least that general vicinity, in the process. So this becomes kind of an issue here, but we're going to get into that in just a moment. So, these are basically the key details we know, okay? Because now we've got 3 people that are dead at this point, and then 1 child that's missing. Because notice, there was no Tina Sharp, who did return home, right? So, now that means this case had to have taken place sometime around 10 o'clock, and give or take, I mean, it would had to have been probably my best guesstimate looking at the crime scene, which I'm not going to show those photos yet again. Okay, I'm not going to show all the crime scene photos, not going to show the nitty gritty. But it does appear that based on what it looked like for decomp, which once again, I'm going to be collecting information as I go and collect more over time, which I will present to you guys somewhere between August and September, if I had to guess. We're going to go over that a little more. But it does appear, just based on visual appearance, that the family had to have been dead for, I had to guess, about 2 hours, 2-3 hours. So we're looking anywhere between about 10 o'clock and give or take, if I had to say anything, probably about 3 to 5 o'clock in the morning. Most likely is when they were killed, between 3 and 5. Because there was some other details we'll get into in just a moment, but we're going to explore the crime scene just through these 7 or 6 photos. But Tina was actually later discovered, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So, the first one we've got is, well, we know they're beaten, right? Well, they did find some markings on the heads that did appear to have been done by the claw of a hammer, and possibly even just the actual blunt part of the hammer itself, where you would nail things in, right? So the head was used pretty profusely, and it does look like it was used on at least 2 of the bodies. And then we also have the hunting knife that was found at the scene. All these had blood on them. They were left at the crime scene. Now, there's another problem here. All right? Because one of the neighbors there, Martin Smart, which is the father of Justin Smart, mind you, his son was at this household at this time, and he was alive. He was recovered alive. He was also one that we'll get into in a later show, because his testimony, I have to still break it down, because there's a lot of interesting parts. But just to kind of break the summary of this, the son, Justin, had actually a little bit of contradicting almost statements. At one point, he claimed he had dreamed seeing this. And at other points, because this is also how we got our witness or our suspect sketches we have down here. But he claimed he'd either dreamed it, and then all of a sudden he did see it, and then other times he was asleep. So which is it there, Justin? Right? But he claimed these things, and so of course we got a witness sketch of what these suspects had looked like. But, that being said, Martin Smart had apparently lost a hammer that was stolen just prior to this crime, just conveniently, which was found apparently in a lake outside of his house years later. Now, mind you, the investigator that looked at that, he'd lived in this area for pretty much his whole life, for a long time. And he said, no, you'd have to completely go out of your way for this, which that makes it a little more suspicious as to why would he just throw this hammer in this lake, right? In this little like pond or whatever it was. But they did find it, and that makes things a little interesting here. But he claimed it was stolen. On top of that, we also got a footprint at the scene. And as you can see, that thing is over 12 inches long. All right, so we got a good sized foot here. You look at the impact of it, we're talking somebody's probably at least, if I had to guess, because it was dry at the time, I would guess he was somewhat kind of probably anywhere between 150 and I'd guess probably about 220 pounds or so. It seems like a big jump. Hey, Cryptic, how's it going? If I had to guess, it's kind of a bigger range, it might seem like, but really when it comes down to the boots on top of the soil and it being dry and kind of compact, all that, it's going to take somewhere in that range to kind of leave an indentation like this. Somebody lighter than that, it's going to be a much lighter footprint. As you can tell, once again, just based on the grooves, things like this, I'd have to take a closer look to get kind of a closer number, but roughly, give or take, that's my best guesstimate. So we know that this was outside the house, and this did not match any of the footprints of any of the people that had been at this crime scene, right? The victims, anything like this. This didn't match them. So that makes this a little more suspicious here. So whose footprint is it? This also did not match any of the officers at the scene, none of their boots or shoes or anything. So begs the question, whose footprint? Then next we, of course, have the bloody markings. It does look to appear to be like gloves or something like this because they couldn't find any fingerprints. Mind you, keep in mind this time they are using DNA and things like this, but they couldn't find any fingerprints based on these things. And both not private investigator, but the special investigator, his name starts with a G. I don't remember what it was, but he even went over and said that no, these guys, they knew what they're doing. Which brings us into the other part of this, is the fact that instead of, shortly into this case, the Department of Justice looks at this and goes, oh, okay, well, we're going to go and send in our guys that are our investigators for organized crime. Now, keep in mind, this is after the girl is basically, they're just, oh, she's the only one that wasn't found in the crime scene. They automatically go to organized crime. Now, this is where things take a little bit of a weird turn, okay? Because they had to have had some knowledge that there was a guy in the area who had connection to organized crime. Instead of sending anybody for missing persons, for sex trafficking, drug trafficking, they didn't even bother. They said, well, there was no drugs at the scene. Well, that doesn't mean there wasn't anything here for drug trafficking, right? Doesn't necessarily, just because drugs are not at the scene does not necessarily mean there's going to be, that it could not be something tied to drug trafficking. This could be somebody that maybe the mom knew something about something. Maybe she, maybe one of the kids had stolen some drugs but happened to not have the drugs at the scene. Could this be tied into it? Absolutely. But they didn't find anything like drugs at the scene, so they automatically just ruled that out. This is the sheriff's office doing this, mind you. Okay. Now, the fact that the Department of Justice just rolled up and said, nope, we're sending our organized crime here. They knew somebody was there. Now, that brings us to our next point here, is that Martin Smart. Well, he was at the bar with his friend John Boobedy. I can't even pronounce his name, but it's John Boobedy, I think, or Boobedy. I don't know. But he had connections to organized crime back over in Chicago, Illinois. Well, that being said, both men had Martin Smart had fled the scene shortly after. He went over to Reno and apparently divorced his wife. Little weird. Okay, so this is, he'd already given his testimony or whatever, and, filled in all these little gaps here. Oh, here's some clues here, here's some clues here. Passed a polygraph, and they just let him go. It's, once again, is it easy to pass a polygraph? No. End of the day, there's a few simple steps. There's been a lot of people that have been able to easily pass the polygraph test just with lies. You convince yourself of the lie that it's true. That's one of the known techniques. On top of that, be able to kind of control, for instance, your heart a little bit, kind of control your breathing. These are known techniques that people that's what they're professionals. They're going to go and be able to pass these things. That's why the polygraph is easily thrown out, because it's easier than heck to pass for the most part. Now, I'm not saying everybody can pass every single time. There's certain conditions, but once again, if you catch somebody and they're able to go and give themselves a little time and they're trained and they know what they're doing, they're going to pass it. And then good luck on that. Now your polygraph is out the window, but they let him go. Okay, so, but end of the day, I would have looked at it at this point, well, there's no prints here. Yet there's blood on the wall, and it does look like it matches the size of a hand, like a glove or a finger, something like this. But it matches something that it was wiped, because you can very clearly see this is wiped, and then there was a point that was touched. Okay, so organized crime, I understand it, but at the same time, they didn't even know where the daughter was. This Tina Sharp didn't know where she was. Instead of sending in missing persons, they refused to do that. They sent in organized crime. Oh, it's all good. It's all good, Crib. But so basically, long story short, so we got to see all these bloody fingerprint-like things without actual fingerprints there. So, the Sheriff's Office and Department of Justice already they're like looking at this is somebody knows what they're doing or they're professional. So as to why. Okay? And last, of course, you can see right there at the very bottom one, those are where the bodies were at. Okay, we only get to see, I believe, one outline, maybe two outlines in the bottom one right there. But end of the day, it was really, really brutal. So just to kind of describe a few. So we had Dana Wingate. Well, Dana was he was killed by asphyxiation. They choked him out. But now here's the thing that's really interesting, because I didn't see any binding on him. And here's the other part that gets a little weird is it was alleged that Justin had overheard Dana and John coming home around 1 a.m., right? And then they were arguing with two men. And they were getting very, very aggravated very, very quickly. And we don't know exactly what was said, but this is what Justin Smart had said. Oh, yes. Cats are always demanding. But, like I said, it's weird because now you see that, okay, there is an altercation. Now, if you further look at the crime scene, which, like I said, we will get back into at a later date, like I said, probably between August and September, we're going to look at the crime scene itself. That one, there will be... we're going to have a lot of blurred images and things like this, but it is going to be an 18 and older only exclusive video because, well, it's going to be going over the crime scene, and then there's going to be blurred images. We have to look at these things to be able to go and start breaking some things down. So we'll do that, but just forewarning. But we know that John was also, him and Sue, or Glenna, they were pretty much the worst off. This is where you start getting the stabs and, the cuts, the pretty hardcore bashings, things like that. The worst of it all happened to those two. You had Dana, yeah, he got beat up a little bit and then he was strangled to death. But the other two were brutally killed. Oh, they weren't like ripped to shreds or things like this, but they were brutally killed. Stabs and beatings, and then and that's how they died. But what ended up happening, because they couldn't find Tina, right? DOJ couldn't find them. Nobody knew where they were. Years later, it was like, I believe between 2 and 4 years later, they found Tina's body over at Camp 18. Her body was found, and it did look like it was kind of a little bit torn to shreds. Once again, this is given time, mind you. So animals probably got to it, things like that. But she was, they found part of her skull, and then, of course, part of her, I believe they said, part of her jaw. And then, of course, they found clothes, and when it came down to it, it's the clothes she wore. But what's even more interesting is the fact they found a roll, an empty roll, mind you, of medical tape near her body as well. So they automatically like, no, this is tied in. So whoever killed those other 3 had to have killed her as well. Which it would make sense. But here's the thing, medical tape though. Why medical tape? We'll break that down at a later time, of course, but what do we get from Justin? Well, we got this sketch of these 2 guys. So who did it? And why? The only thing we've got so far is from Martin's ex-wife, Marilyn, who had said that she was at the bar with the men at 11 p.m. on April 11th. And she had left around 11, and then both the men had returned back to their residence, the Smart residence, at around 2 a.m. And that they were burning some objects there. And of course, later on, what's his face? Martin apparently had even basically admitted to murdering Sue and John. Did not say with Dana, though, or Tina, but he did say Sue and John he did kill. Which means, well, they're giving 2 suspects. We get to see both what they look like. Do they match the descriptions? Like I said, we will be breaking down more in a future episode or 2. This is a case that we'll probably be visiting quite a bit, just like with the murder of the Gray State, and a few other cases coming up soon. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. That's all I've got for you guys. If you guys have any other questions about this case, any comments, things like that, make sure to leave those comments down below. And for those that haven't subscribed and would like to see more of this content coming up, please feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and make sure to like this video. It just really helps the algorithm show that this is content that other people should be checking out. And thank you guys for tuning in tonight.